Amelia was closing the lid on a box of leftover food when a man's voice cut through the empty kitchen. "What are you doing?" She froze completely. CEO Logan Wyatt stood quietly in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the container in her hand. She started to apologize, but an overdue electric bill slipped from her pocket and landed at her feet. Her face went pale. Quietly, she admitted she had been skipping meals for days just to cover rent. Logan did not fire her. The next morning, the whole company woke up to an announcement no one saw coming. Stay with this story to see exactly how Logan slowly changed Amelia's life and completely transformed the entire company forever. It was almost 10 at night on a Friday when the last guests finally left the grand ballroom of the Hawthorne flagship hotel in Charlotte. The investor gala had run long, filled with champagne toasts and polished speeches about growth and shareholder returns, and Amelia Carter had been on her feet for nearly 13 hours straight. She had checked table arrangements twice, fixed a mistake in the guest list, calmed a nervous server, and handled a dozen last-minute requests that nobody else wanted to touch. Now the ballroom was empty, the chandeliers dimmed, and only a handful of staff remained in the kitchen, scraping plates and packing away trays of food that had barely been touched. Grace Miller, a kitchen worker who had spent nearly 2 decades at Hawthorne, nodded toward the counter where trays of untouched appetizers and half-full chafing dishes sat waiting for disposal. Company policy required that surplus food from private events be discarded rather than distributed, a rule meant to avoid liability, though everyone in the kitchen quietly resented it. Grace told Amelia that if she did not take some of it home, it would end up in the dumpster within the hour. Amelia hesitated for a long moment, glancing toward the door, before finally reaching for a small paper container. She was careful. She only chose food that had never left the serving line, nothing that guests had already picked through, and she planned to make it stretch through the weekend. She had no idea that Logan Wyatt, the company's chief executive, had come back to the hotel that night because he had left a folder of documents in his office upstairs. He walked through the service corridor toward the kitchen, still in his suit jacket, and stopped when he saw her standing at the counter with the container half full in her hands. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice quiet but direct. Amelia froze completely. The policy against employees removing food from events was one she knew well, posted on the staff bulletin board along with a dozen other rules nobody ever discussed out loud. She set the container down immediately and did not try to explain herself away. She simply said she understood if this meant trouble, and she meant it. As she reached for her phone to check the time, a folded paper slipped from her jacket pocket and landed near his shoes. Logan bent down and picked it up before she could. It was an overdue electric bill, the kind with a red stamp across the top warning of a coming shutoff. Tucked just behind it in her bag, he noticed another notice, this one about a rent increase that had taken effect the month before. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Amelia, her voice steady despite the color draining from her face, admitted the truth plainly. Her paycheck had not yet cleared. Her rent had gone up. She had been skipping lunch for days, sometimes dinner too, just to make the math work. She did not ask him for mercy and did not offer excuses about why she deserved an exception. She only said that if he needed to write her up, she understood, and she would accept whatever came next. Logan looked at the container in front of her, then at the trays of food behind it, thousands of dollars worth of meals that would be thrown away within the hour, regardless of what happened to her. He did not answer right away. His silence stretched long enough that Amelia became convinced he was simply deciding how to phrase her termination. Finally, Logan turned to leave the kitchen, and just before the door swung shut behind him, he said something that made no sense to her at all. He told her not to bother staying home on Monday. Amelia stood alone under the fluorescent lights, the container still open on the counter, utterly unsure whether she had just kept her job or made everything infinitely worse. Saturday morning found Amelia in the small apartment she shared with her daughter, a tidy but sparse 2-bedroom unit on the edge of town where nothing sat unused and nothing sat wasted. The refrigerator held little beyond the container she had brought home, a carton of eggs, and a nearly empty jug of milk she stretched as far as it would go. She kept the household running the way she kept everything running, quietly and without complaint, making sure her daughter's mornings looked ordinary, even when the numbers behind them were not. When her daughter asked if she had eaten at the party, Amelia said yes, though her actual dinner that night had been a cup of coffee and nothing else. 3 years earlier, her husband had packed a bag and left, and the support payments that were supposed to follow grew inconsistent before stopping altogether. Amelia never spoke badly of him in front of their daughter, and she never leaned on her own family for money, partly out of pride, and partly because she had watched pride turn into resentment in other households and did not want that for her own. She had once kept a small emergency fund, built slowly over years of careful saving, but a broken car transmission, a spike in insurance premiums, and the relentless climb of rent had erased it entirely within 18 months. It was important to understand that Amelia was not struggling because of carelessness. She budgeted every dollar with the precision of an accountant, tracked every bill in a worn notebook, and cut corners nobody would notice unless they were looking closely. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. Her paycheck had not kept pace with the cost of simply existing in the city where she worked, and there was nothing reckless in that gap, only the slow mathematics of being underpaid in a system that never asked how far a wage actually stretched. Across town, Logan sat in his office long after most executives had gone home, reviewing internal reports he had never personally requested before. He asked David Parker, the company's chief financial officer, to pull the full staff compensation structure, the recorded overtime hours across every property, the amount of food discarded each month from company events, and whatever formal assistance program existed for employees in financial distress. David was visibly surprised, since in 6 years of working alongside Logan, the CEO had never once asked to see this particular combination of numbers himself. What Logan found troubled him more than he expected. The company was discarding tens of thousands of dollars worth of usable food every single month across its properties, while internal records showed that a meaningful number of full-time employees relied on local food banks just to get through the week. He began to understand that the container he had seen in Amelia's hands was not an isolated incident but a small, visible symptom of something much larger running quietly beneath the surface of the company he ran. Word of Logan's sudden interest in staffing data traveled fast, and it reached Jessica Morgan, the regional director of operations, before the weekend was even over. Jessica had been the one to push through a freeze on wage increases the previous year, arguing it protected the company's margins during a difficult quarter, and she did not like the direction Logan's questions seemed to be heading. Buried deeper in the records Logan requested, he also discovered something that struck him harder than the wage data alone. Amelia had twice applied for emergency assistance from an internal fund, and both times she had burned away because company policy required employees to plead their case in person before a review committee of managers who barely knew her. Amelia arrived at the office early Monday morning, dressed carefully and braced for a summons to human resources that never came. Instead, at 8 o'clock sharp, a company-wide email landed in every inbox across Hawthorne Hospitality Group, and within minutes the building was buzzing with quiet, startled conversation. Logan had announced a pilot program effective immediately. Any safe, unserved food remaining after company events would now be packaged for staff or delivered directly to local shelters and food assistance organizations rather than thrown away as before. Employees who wanted a portion of that food could simply take it, with no explanation required and no committee to face. That alone would have been enough to dominate the morning's gossip, but there was more. Logan had also ordered an independent audit covering employee wages, recorded overtime, benefits enrollment, and cost of living figures for every city where the company operated a property. Nobody in the building could remember a CEO ever requesting anything close to that level of scrutiny into how ordinary staff were actually paid and treated. Amelia understood immediately that whatever had happened in that kitchen Friday night had set something enormous into motion, and she felt a strange mixture of gratitude and deep embarrassment settle over her at once. She found a moment to speak with Logan privately later that day and asked him directly not to turn her into what she called the company's inspirational story. This was the moment that revealed the core of who Amelia was. She did not want pity. She did not want her coworkers whispering about her circumstances behind her back, and she absolutely did not want special treatment because she was a single mother raising a daughter alone. She needed him to understand that dignity mattered to her more than convenience ever could. Logan agreed without hesitation to protect her identity completely, promising that her name would never appear anywhere near the policy change. Then he told her something that stayed with her far longer than the policy itself. He said he had not rewritten company practice because she took one container of food home. He had rewritten it because she had shown him exactly how foolish the old policy truly was, and he could no longer pretend not to see it once it had been placed directly in front of him. For the first time, Amelia looked at her employer and saw someone entirely different from the distant, unreadable executive she had assumed him to be. Not everyone welcomed the change. Jessica pushed back hard in a meeting later that week, arguing that giving employees free access to surplus food would encourage what she called an unhealthy dependence on company generosity, framing it as a slippery slope toward entitlement rather than basic decency. Logan asked her calmly to produce data supporting that claim, any figures at all showing that similar programs at comparable companies had caused the problems she was describing. Jessica had nothing. Her objections sat in the room unanswered, and Logan moved the meeting forward without further discussion, though he made a quiet note of how forcefully she had resisted something that cost the company almost nothing to implement. By the end of the week, the independent audit team had been assembled and given full access to every financial record connected to staffing and events across the company's properties. What they found in the first several days would prove to be a great deal larger and far more troubling than anyone in that Monday morning meeting could have imagined. The audit uncovered a pattern that troubled David from the very first spreadsheet he reviewed. Labor budgets at several properties had climbed steadily year over year, yet the actual take-home pay of frontline employees had barely moved during that same stretch. Roughly $1.7 million over 2 years had been logged under vague, hard-to-trace categories with names like consulting, staffing optimization, and operational restructuring, none of which appeared to correspond to any service anyone could clearly identify. Logan asked David to trace every one of those payments back to its source, no matter how long it took or how many departments it touched along the way. Almost by accident, Amelia became one of the most valuable people in that investigation. Because event coordination required her to keep detailed staffing sheets and vendor invoices going back years, she had access to records nobody else in the building had bothered to preserve. Digging through her own files, she noticed something the auditors had missed entirely. The number of staff actually scheduled for major events consistently fell short of the number budgeted and paid for on paper. That single discrepancy explained why she and her coworkers had spent years quietly doing the work of 2 people while being paid for 1. Logan asked Amelia to formally assist the audit team, insisting she be compensated properly for every additional hour the work required rather than treated as a favor she owed him. The two of them began working closely together in the weeks that followed, reviewing schedules, invoices, and staffing patterns late into the evening. Logan quickly recognized that Amelia possessed an organizational instinct far beyond what her official job title suggested. She could scan a single operations sheet and identify inconsistencies within minutes that trained auditors had spent days trying to locate. Amelia, in turn, began to see a different version of Logan than the one whispered about in break rooms across the company. He never wanted to be flattered and grew visibly uncomfortable whenever someone tried. He remembered the names of employees he had met only once, down to small details about their families. He drank his coffee black, refused the fancy machine in the executive suite, and was almost always the last person to leave the building at night, long after his own assistants had gone home. Their working relationship grew steadily warmer, though both of them kept it carefully professional, letting the mystery unraveling around them take priority over anything else developing quietly beneath it. Jessica noticed the growing partnership between Amelia and Logan almost immediately, and it unsettled her far more than the audit itself did. She began looking for ways to remove Amelia from the investigation entirely, first through subtle scheduling conflicts, then through pointed remarks to other managers questioning why an event coordinator was suddenly involved in financial matters far above her position. Neither Logan nor Amelia paid much attention to the friction at first. Both of them focused entirely on tracing the strange gaps in the company's books. Then David uncovered something that changed the entire shape of the investigation. One of the outside consulting firms that had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments over the past 2 years had a direct personal connection to a close relative of Jessica Morgan, a link buried carefully enough that it had taken weeks of paperwork to surface, but unmistakable once it finally did. Sensing that the walls were closing in, Jessica decided to strike first rather than wait for the audit to reach her directly. She pulled old security footage from the night of the investor gala, the recording showing Amelia carrying a small container of food out of the kitchen. The clip was carefully edited to cut away the trays of food clearly marked for disposal just out of frame, leaving only the impression of an employee helping herself to company property. An anonymous account forwarded the clip to a wide circle of managers across the company within a single afternoon. Rumors spread through the building faster than anyone could contain them. Some said Amelia had been stealing from company events for months. Others whispered that she had somehow manipulated the CEO into changing company policy entirely for her own benefit. A few claimed the new food program existed for no reason other than to protect her from consequences she clearly deserved. When Amelia walked into the break room that afternoon, every conversation stopped at once, and the silence that followed hit her harder than any of the whispers themselves ever could have. That evening, Amelia typed out a letter of resignation and placed it on Logan's desk without a word of explanation. Logan refused to process it and asked her directly why she wanted to leave. Her answer came sharp and unguarded. She did not want him continuing to rescue her, she said, because every time he stepped in to defend her, it only confirmed what everyone already suspected, that she was receiving special treatment she had not earned. Logan did not argue with her in that moment. Instead, he quietly asked the technology department to pull the complete unedited security footage from that night. The full recording told an entirely different story. It clearly showed food already marked for disposal, Grace instructing Amelia to take some of it home, and Amelia selecting only a small, modest portion for herself. Even with the truth fully documented, Logan chose not to reveal Amelia's private financial circumstances to the wider company in order to clear her name. Instead, he stated plainly and publicly that the real failure belonged to an outdated policy, not to any employee who had simply been trying to survive within it. Jessica's plan had failed to accomplish what she intended, and her frustration only deepened. Amelia agreed to withdraw her resignation, though something between her and Logan had shifted, and both of them grew noticeably more careful around one another in the days that followed. Then, without warning, David asked Logan into a private meeting and set a thick folder down on the table between them without a single word of introduction. Inside were approval signatures on hundreds of thousands of dollars in payments, each one bearing Logan's own name, on documents he had absolutely no memory of ever seeing, let alone signing. Logan stared at the folder for a long time, unable to reconcile the signatures in front of him with any memory he actually held. If those documents were genuine, he could face serious legal consequences of his own, regardless of whether he had truly authorized the payments. The board of directors was notified within days, and an emergency meeting was scheduled to address what appeared to be a growing financial crisis at the highest level of the company. Word moved quickly, and not always accurately, through every layer of the organization. Jessica used the confusion to her advantage, quietly suggesting to several board members that Logan's judgment had become compromised, that his recent policy changes reflected emotional decision-making rather than sound leadership, and that his close working relationship with a subordinate employee raised troubling questions about his priorities. Amelia, sensing how dangerous the situation had become, deliberately pulled back from Logan in public settings, hoping distance might protect him from further scrutiny rather than add to it. For the first time since taking the role, Logan faced a real possibility of losing his position as chief executive. It was Amelia who first noticed something strange buried within the old event documentation she had been reviewing for weeks. Several of the suspicious signatures were dated on days when Logan had provably been nowhere near Charlotte at all. One fell on a day he was confirmed at a conference in New York. Another landed during a scheduled property inspection in Denver, hundreds of miles away. Amelia tracked down the original travel confirmations and itinerary emails proving his location on both occasions, then brought them straight to David for verification. David dug into the system metadata behind the digital signatures themselves and found the answer buried in the access logs. Logan's electronic signature had been applied through an administrative override, a function available to only a small handful of people across the entire company. When David cross-referenced that short list of names against the timeline of suspicious approvals, Jessica's name appeared unmistakably among them. Logan wanted to suspend her immediately, unwilling to wait another day with her still holding that level of access. Amelia urged him to hold back, at least for now. If Jessica realized the truth had already surfaced, she would have every opportunity to destroy whatever evidence remained before anyone could act on it. It was, remarkably, the first time Logan set aside his own instinct entirely and followed a strategy built by someone he had once believed to be simply an event coordinator handling banquet logistics. He asked her, almost bewildered, how she had managed to see the pattern so quickly when a team of trained auditors had spent weeks circling around the same documents without noticing what she had caught in a single afternoon. Amelia told him plainly that she had spent years learning to notice small inconsistencies, because in her own life, a single missed detail on a bill or a schedule could mean the difference between making rent and falling behind. What looked like an unusual skill to him had simply been survival to her, sharpened over time until it became second nature. In the span of a few short weeks, the woman who had once feared losing her job over a single container of food had quietly become the person keeping her CEO from losing the entire company. Jessica did not wait for the investigation to run its full course before making her move. She rallied support from several sympathetic board members ahead of the scheduled meeting, framing herself as a concerned executive raising legitimate governance concerns rather than someone with anything to hide. When the meeting finally convened, Logan was asked to formally account for the $1.7 million in unexplained payments, the sudden wave of new company policies, and the nature of his relationship with Amelia. Jessica presented the edited security footage of Amelia removing food from the kitchen as evidence that Logan had shown clear favoritism toward a subordinate employee. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Logan still refused to disclose Amelia's private financial circumstances, even though doing so might have made his own position easier to defend. He accepted the very real risk of a suspension vote rather than turn her personal struggles into a tool for saving his career. When Amelia learned what was happening inside that room, she made a deliberate choice. She walked in as a witness to the company's operational failures, not as someone asking for sympathy over her own hardship. She laid out event schedules, staffing sheets, actual recorded labor hours, and a stack of invoices that never quite matched the numbers they were supposed to represent. David followed with the technical evidence surrounding the falsified digital signatures, walking the board through exactly how the override had been used and by whom. Logan presented the findings of the independent audit in full, tracing the flow of money directly to the outside consulting firm connected to Jessica's own relative. Jessica attempted to shift blame downward onto subordinates who had supposedly acted without her knowledge or approval. Grace, along with several other longtime managers, stood and confirmed under questioning that the directives to cut staffing levels below what was budgeted had come directly and repeatedly from Jessica herself. Faced with the combined weight of the financial trail, the falsified signatures, and multiple first-hand accounts, the board voted to suspend Jessica immediately, pending a full referral to legal counsel and the appropriate outside authorities. Logan was formally cleared of any responsibility for approving the fraudulent payments that had triggered the entire crisis in the first place. One board member, an older woman who had sat on the committee for over a decade, quietly told Logan afterward that in all her years overseeing the company, she had never seen a chief executive fight so hard to protect a single employee's privacy at the risk of his own career. Logan simply replied that the moment leadership stopped protecting the people lowest on the org chart, it stopped deserving to lead anyone at all. What had begun as a single container of leftover food, nearly small enough to be forgotten by the following morning, had ultimately become the very first thread that unraveled an entire scheme quietly draining money from the people who could least afford to lose it. In the days after the scandal settled, Amelia half expected Logan to hand her some kind of check or bonus as a quiet reward for everything she had endured and everything she had helped uncover. Logan understood, almost instinctively, that this was precisely the wrong way to honor what she had done. He did not offer to pay off her debts directly. He did not offer her a new apartment or any grand, sweeping gesture designed to make headlines. He never wrote her an unrealistic check meant to erase years of hardship in a single afternoon. Instead, he asked Human Resources to formally evaluate the actual scope of the work she had been doing for years. The results were clear and frankly overdue. Amelia had effectively been performing the full responsibilities of an operations manager while being paid at the coordinator level the entire time. The company opened a transparent formal hiring process for the newly justified position, and Amelia was required to interview for it exactly like every other candidate under consideration, with no shortcuts extended in her direction. She earned the position entirely on her own merit, and the new salary finally allowed her to build real, lasting stability into her life rather than simply staying afloat month to month. More importantly, Logan extended the reforms far beyond her individual situation, rolling them out company-wide. A full salary review process was introduced, along with a confidential emergency assistance program that no longer required employees to plead their case before a committee of strangers. Overtime pay became transparent and properly documented, the surplus food program expanded permanently across every property, and an independent reporting line was established for employees to flag concerns without fear of retaliation. Amelia came to understand something important in watching all of this unfold. Logan had not simply rescued one struggling woman out of pity or guilt. He had repaired a broken system that had been quietly grinding down hard-working people for years, forcing them to suffer in silence rather than speak up. Once Amelia moved into her new role, reporting to a different department entirely and no longer answering directly to Logan, something unspoken between them was finally, quietly allowed to grow into something more. Colleagues who had once whispered about favoritism now watched Amelia lead her own meetings with a calm authority that left little room for doubt about why she had earned the position. Even Jessica's former allies, once quick to question every decision Logan made, grew notably quiet once the results of the new policies began showing up in the company's own numbers month after month. Several months passed, and Amelia gradually paid off the overdue bills that had once haunted her, using nothing but her own new paycheck and careful planning. She and her daughter moved into a slightly larger apartment, still modest but comfortable, conveniently close to her daughter's school. On a quiet weekend afternoon, her daughter helped her unpack the last few boxes in their new kitchen, laughing about which cabinet the cereal belonged in, a small, ordinary scene that quietly reflected just how far their household had come. Logan eventually invited Amelia to dinner, and she asked him directly, half joking and half serious, whether this was meant to be a business meeting or simply an act of pity. Logan told her plainly that it was neither. It was a date, he said, and if she said no, absolutely nothing about her job would change the following morning. Amelia laughed, genuinely and easily, in a way she had not allowed herself in a long time. This was the moment the story finally, openly, turned toward something gentler. Over dinner, Logan opened up about why her situation had struck him so deeply from the very beginning. His own mother had worked 2 jobs throughout his childhood, stretching every dollar just to keep their small household running. As a boy, he had believed that restaurant food, the kind served at events like the one where he first found Amelia, belonged exclusively to people far wealthier than his family could ever hope to be. Somewhere along the way, after years of success, he had quietly forgotten what it felt like to check a price tag before deciding what to eat. Amelia understood, listening to him, that Logan had not changed because he wanted to be seen as some kind of hero. He had changed because meeting her had forced him to recognize just how far he had drifted from the very people who kept his company running every single day. Neither of them rushed anything after that. They agreed, without needing to say it aloud in so many words, to let whatever this was unfold slowly and honestly, the way most things worth keeping usually do. Amelia found herself looking forward to their quiet dinners not because of anything Logan could offer her, but because he listened the way few people ever had, without trying to fix her or measure her against some idea of who a struggling single mother was supposed to be. For the first time in years, she let herself imagine a future that did not revolve entirely around survival. A year later, Hawthorne Hospitality Group held its annual gathering at the very same flagship hotel where the entire story had first begun. The kitchen, though, looked nothing like it once had. After every event now, safe and properly prepared food was carefully packaged, with a portion set aside for any staff member who wanted it, and the remainder delivered directly to local shelters and food assistance programs throughout the city. Nobody had to prove hardship or justify need to receive a simple, decent meal. The program had since expanded across every property in the company's growing portfolio. Employee turnover had dropped noticeably, satisfaction scores had climbed higher than they had ever been recorded, and profits remained strong throughout, quietly dismantling the old assumption that treating employees fairly and running a profitable business somehow worked against each other. David reported that the investigation into Jessica had recovered a significant portion of the missing funds, and she now faced serious legal consequences stemming directly from what the audit had uncovered. Amelia now held the title of Regional Operations Manager, respected across the company for her competence and judgment rather than for the circumstances that had once defined her to strangers. She and Logan had been together for many months by then, having drawn careful, deliberate boundaries around their working lives from the very beginning. Her daughter made only a brief appearance near the end of that evening, running through the lobby with a friend from school, a small glimpse proving just how settled and ordinary their family life had finally become. After the event wound down, Amelia found herself drawn back to the same kitchen where everything had started, standing near the very counter where Logan had once caught her holding that small container. He found her there a few minutes later. Grace appeared behind them both, setting down 2 containers of food with a playful grin, remarking that nobody was getting fired this time around. Amelia laughed, the sound easy and unguarded. Logan asked if she remembered that night clearly. She told him she had believed in that moment that it was the worst night of her entire life. Logan looked at her for a long moment before answering. He said he had come to see it differently himself, as the last night he was allowed to remain unaware of what was truly happening inside the company he had built his whole career around. He did not rush toward a proposal or force the moment into something bigger than it needed to be. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed her a small key. It was not the key to a house or anything meant to sweep her off her feet. It was the key to her own new office at the regional headquarters, a position she had earned entirely through her own effort and skill. Amelia felt something settle warmly in her chest, understanding fully, perhaps for the first time, that what she had needed all along was never a wealthy man willing to cover her bills. What she had needed was opportunity, basic respect, and a system finally built to treat people fairly. She thought back to the woman who had stood frozen in this exact spot a year earlier, terrified of losing everything over a single container of food, and realized how far that woman had come without ever once losing sight of who she was. Logan extended his hand toward her. He asked simply if he could take her home for dinner now instead. Amelia took his hand without hesitation, and the two of them walked out of that kitchen together, leaving behind neat rows of containers packed carefully by the staff, a quite lasting symbol of how much could change from a single, seemingly small moment nobody had expected to matter at all. Kindness is not always about writing a check or handing someone a windfall they never asked for. Sometimes real kindness means noticing the quiet reasons a hardworking person still cannot get ahead, and having the courage to actually fix them rather than looking away. Logan never changed Amelia's life with his own money. He gave her the fairness that let her change her own life one honest step at a time. And in turn, Amelia changed Logan just as deeply, teaching a chief executive who had learned to see only numbers on a page to finally see the people standing behind every single one of them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes that quiet effort and decency eventually find their reward.